Thyra's scream tore through the night as she raised the bloody dagger. Before her, the burly Jarl Ragnar fell to his knees, his eyes wide with surprise more than pain. "For my son," she whispered, while the great hall sank into a deadly silence. No one dared move as the clan leader collapsed, and little Leif ran into his mother's arms for the first time in 3 winters. Thank you for joining this story. Our channel is just beginning, and every subscription makes a huge difference in helping us reach our first 1,000 followers. If you find value in these tales from Viking times, please consider subscribing and commenting below. Tell us which city you're watching from. Your support means everything as we bring these powerful stories to life. The morning air was sharp and biting, carrying the scent of salt from the nearby fjord, where waves crashed rhythmically against the rocky shore. Thin wisps of mist curled over the frozen earth, clinging to the gnarled branches of skeletal trees that bordered the small village. The rising sun cast a pale, cold light over the wooden cabins, their steep roofs heavy with snow that had settled quietly during the night. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, mingling with the cold breath of the villagers as they began their day. Among these humble homes stood one small, weathered cabin that bore the marks of grief and endurance. Its walls, made of rough-hewn logs darkened by years of rain and frost, seemed to sag under the weight of sorrow that had settled inside. Within, Thyra Gunnar's daughter moved with a quiet determination, her slender hands busy at the loom that occupied a corner of the room, weaving strands of coarse wool into fabric. The rhythmic thud of the shuttle across the threads echoed softly, a steady heartbeat in a world that often felt unsteady and cruel. Thyra was 28 winters now, her face a map of pain and resilience. Her green-gray eyes held the weary watchfulness of one who had known loss and betrayal too intimately. Her dark hair, usually braided tightly against the biting cold, framed a face etched with lines born not just of age but of sleepless nights and unspoken fears. The faint scar above her upper lip, barely noticeable to a stranger, was a silent witness to the hardships she had endured. Her hands were rough and calloused, shaped by years of labor and the unforgiving climate, yet they moved with careful precision as she worked. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a wooden table scarred by time, a few stools, and a low bench along the wall. On the table lay a small collection of items carefully arranged, a carved wooden wolf amulet, worn smooth by years of touch, and a handful of dried herbs tied with a faded leather thong. The wolf was a gift from her late husband Hakon, a talisman meant to protect their son, Leif, and keep the memory of Hakon alive within these walls. Every morning, Thyra found herself drawn to that amulet, her fingers tracing its edges as if searching for answers or strength. The weight of the past 3 years pressed heavily upon her. Since the day the Jarl Ragnar Skarsgård had taken Leif from her arms, claiming the boy would be raised as a warrior to honor his father's name, her world had been fractured into fragments of longing and despair. The winter wind stirred beneath the cracks in the cabin's wooden walls, whispering through the room like a ghost of memories. She felt it on her skin, cold and unforgiving, much like the man who had stolen her son. The air smelled faintly of pine sap and wood smoke, but beneath that was a subtle bitterness, a hint of decay that lingered in the damp corners. The hearth, usually the heart of any home, was cold this morning, the embers from last night's fire reduced to gray ash, the shadows stretching long and cold across the floor. Outside, the village stirred awake. The muted sounds of footsteps crunching over frozen earth, the distant clatter of wooden wheels on packed snow, and the murmurs of early risers filled the air. Men and women prepared for the day ahead, some heading to the fields or the docks, others tending to animals sheltered in crude pens. Children, bundled in thick cloaks, stumbled bleary-eyed from their homes, their breath forming small clouds that vanished swiftly in the cold. But inside Thyra's cabin, time seemed suspended. The outside world's ordinary rhythms clashed painfully with the turmoil inside her chest. Every day was a battle between hope and despair. Would her son remember her? Would he still be the child she had held so tenderly before the Jarl's claim? Or had the cold hands of the clan's authority reshaped him into something unrecognizable? She paused her weaving and stood, moving to the small window that looked out toward the fjord. The gray waters stretched endlessly, a mirror to the heavy sky, flecked with shards of ice that drifted slowly. The wind tugged at her cloak, rattling the wooden shutters. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, closing her eyes briefly as the salty breeze brushed past her face. The world beyond was vast and merciless, but within her, a fierce flame refused to die. Her solitude was broken by the faint creak of the cabin door. Hilda Thordaughter entered quietly, her presence as familiar as the seasons. The ancient healer's eyes, sharp despite their age, swept the room with a knowing gaze. The lines on Hilda's face told stories of decades spent walking the thin line between life and death. Her hands, though tremulous, still held the strength of those who had healed wounds and whispered prayers to the gods. "Thyra," Hilda said softly, setting down a small bundle of herbs on the table. The scent of juniper and sage mixed with the lingering smoke of the fire. "Winter has been harder this year. The cold seeps deeper, and the nights grow long without hope." Thyra nodded without turning, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. "I can endure the cold, Hilda, but the winter in my heart." Her voice cracked, the words caught in the thick silence. Hilda moved closer, placing a weathered hand on Thyra's arm. "You have endured much, child. The gods marked you with trials not to break you, but to shape your spirit. Tell me, what news do you bring from the hall?" Thyra swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "The Jarl prepares a great feast for the solstice. He will gather the clan, the warriors, and the boys he took. Leif will be there." Hilda's eyes darkened. "A dangerous night. The Jarl's celebrations are not what they seem. Watch carefully, Thyra. The night holds shadows deeper than the winter's chill." That warning hung heavily between them. Thyra's mind raced back to moments stolen in fragments. The stolen glimpses of Leif during the training sessions beyond the village, the way his shoulders were rigid, his eyes less bright than before. She remembered the way he flinched when the Jarl's voice rose, the way the other boys seemed hollowed out, like sap drained from a once-living tree. The day dragged on in a blur of preparation and quiet desperation. Thyra worked to muffle the storm brewing inside her, weaving by the weak light of the low-hanging sun. Her thoughts were interrupted only by the occasional creak in the cabin or the distant laughter of villagers preparing for the feast. She felt the weight of each passing moment, knowing the solstice night would bring answers, and perhaps change everything. When dusk finally settled, the village transformed. Torches flickered along the main path leading to the great hall, their flames casting long, trembling shadows against the snow. The once silent woods seemed alive with whispers carried by the wind, the unspoken fears and hopes of a people bound by honor, tradition, and the iron grip of their Jarl. Thyra wrapped herself in a heavy cloak, her breath steaming as she stepped outside. The icy ground crunched beneath her worn leather boots as she made her way toward the hall, the heart of power and darkness in this frozen land. The wooden structure loomed ahead, a fortress of strength, adorned with carved dragons and runes meant to ward off evil. But tonight, those symbols felt hollow, unable to protect the innocent from the cruelty festering within. Inside, the great hall was alive with the coarse sounds of revelry. The air was thick with the scent of roasting meat, spiced mead, and sweat. Warriors clad in furs and leather filled the long benches, their voices rising and falling like thunder as they sang songs of glory and conquest. The flicker of countless torches cast dancing light over faces flushed with drink and fierce pride. At the far end, raised upon a carved dais, sat Jarl Ragnar. As the night deepened, the music grew louder, the warriors' laughter more raucous. Yet Thyra's eyes never left her son. She noticed the other boys too, their faces pale and strained, their bodies bearing marks that spoke of more than mere discipline. The Jarl's voice rose, commanding attention, and with a ruthless hand, he summoned the boys to follow him. Thyra's heart clenched as she slipped away into the shadows, trailing silently behind the group. Her breath came shallow and fast, her body tense with the fear of discovery. She pressed herself against the cold stone of a nearby wall and peered through the narrow gap of a door left ajar. What she saw shattered the fragile hope she had clung to for years. The Jarl's chamber was dimly lit, filled with an oppressive heaviness. The boy he selected was trembling, eyes wide with terror. Whispers of threats and twisted promises wove through the air, the language of power wielded to break innocent spirits. The room held a suffocating silence, punctuated by the quiet sobs and the harsh commands that rang like chains. Leif stood among them, his face pale but eyes fixed on the scene with a mixture of horror and silent resignation. His small shoulders tensed as if bracing for an inevitable fate. Thyra's hands shook, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle the scream that threatened to escape. Retreating into the shadows, she felt the icy grip of despair tighten around her heart. The boy she had given life to was not being raised to be a warrior, but to be broken. The Jarl's promises were lies coated in cruelty. That night, as the echoes of the feast faded and the villagers settled into uneasy rest, Thyra made a decision that would alter the course of her life and the fate of her son. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but the fire of a mother's love burned brighter than any winter darkness. The heavy silence of the night pressed in on Thyra as she slipped away from the great hall, her heart pounding beneath layers of coarse wool and leather. The flickering torchlight cast long, restless shadows along the narrow corridors, each step echoing faintly against the cold stone walls. Her breath came in shallow bursts, mingling with the chill that seeped through the gaps in the wooden beams. Every nerve screamed for caution, but the iron knot in her chest, tied tight by fear and fierce love, propelled her onward. Ahead, the faint sounds of muffled sobs and whispered pleas curled through the air like smoke, drawing her closer to the forbidding chamber where the Jarl held his terrible dominion. Thyra pressed her back against the rough wall, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light filtering beneath the doorway. Through the narrow crack, she glimpsed a small figure huddled in one corner, trembling like a sapling caught in a storm. It was one of the boys, the same age as Leif once had been, though thinner, paler, and broken in ways that no child should ever be. The boy's wide, terrified eyes darted around the room, searching for escape where none existed. His small hands clutched a threadbare tunic tightly, as if it were a shield against the darkness that surrounded him. Thyra's throat constricted. The sight struck her with a raw, aching sorrow that gnawed at her resolve. This child was a mirror reflecting all that she feared for Leif, all that she had tried to bury beneath the cold surface of her grief. She wanted to reach out, to pull him away from this nightmare, but the weight of the Jarl's power loomed like a mountain, a fortress of cruelty she dared not challenge openly. A sudden noise made her flinch. A harsh command barked from within, sharp as the crack of a whip. The boy flinched, pressing himself lower against the cold floor, his breath hitching in a silent sob. Thyra felt the hot sting of tears behind her eyes, but forced herself to stay still, hidden. The fire in her belly grew hotter, fueled by the unbearable injustice playing out before her. Her mind raced. Could she save him? Could she save Leif? The question tore at her as fiercely as the biting wind outside. To act was to invite ruin, to bring the wrath of the Jarl down upon herself and those she held dear. Yet to do nothing, was that an option? To stand by while innocence was devoured by darkness was a betrayal of every oath she held sacred. Her hands curled into fists, nails biting into her palms. The faces of all the mothers who had lost their sons to the Jarls will swam before her, silent, hollow-eyed, broken like the boy before her. Could she carry the burden of their suffering, too? A soft creak behind her startled her, and she spun, heart leaping into her throat. Hilda stood in the doorway, her old eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. She held out a small bundle wrapped in cloth, her herbs, her remedies, and a whispered promise of aid. "Thyra," Hilda said in a voice thick with age but steady as steel, "the gods do not abandon those who dare to fight. This path you walk is perilous, but not without hope." Thyra swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I cannot leave him here. Not like this. But to face the Jarl, the risk is more than I can bear alone." Hilda stepped closer, placing a weathered hand on Thyra's shoulder. "You are not alone. The darkness may be deep, but even the longest night must yield to dawn." For a moment, the weight of despair threatened to crush her, but the old woman's words stirred something fierce and bright within. Thyra's eyes flicked back to the trembling boy through the door. He was a fragile ember, flickering in the cold, and she was the wind that might carry that flame to safety. A sudden resolve settled over her like armor. She would not let fear bind her. She would risk the wrath of the Jarl, the scorn of the clan, and the uncertain path ahead. Slowly, she slid the door open just enough to slip inside, the scent of smoke, sweat, and damp stone overwhelming her senses. The boy's eyes widened at her presence, a mix of hope and disbelief flickering across his pale face. "Come," Thyra whispered, kneeling beside him, her voice a balm in the oppressive gloom. "You are not alone. I will not let them break you." His hands trembled as he reached for hers, small and cold, and for the first time in years, Thyra felt the fragile pulse of hope stir in her chest. Together, they would face the darkness, or perish trying. The choice was clear. To act was to invite ruin, but to live without fighting was to die a slow death of the soul. As she helped the boy to his feet, a distant howl rose from the frozen fjord outside, a mournful cry carried by the wind, a call to battle not of swords, but of courage and love. Thyra took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of the past, and the uncertain promise of the future entwined like the threads on her loom. The night stretched before them, dark, cold, and merciless. But within Thyra burned a ferocity no frost could quench. She would fight, for her son, for the broken boy at her side, and for the souls crushed beneath the Jarl's iron rule. No matter the cost. The night air was heavy with silence as Thyra guided the trembling boy through the snow-laden path back toward her cabin. The moon, veiled behind scattered clouds, cast a faint silver glow over the frosted pines, their branches bowed low beneath the weight of winter's grasp. Each step left a shallow imprint in the crusted snow, the crunch muffled beneath layers of wool and leather. Thyra's breath rose in quick, misty puffs, but she kept her face stoic, her eyes sharp and watchful, scanning the shadows for any sign of pursuit. The boy walked close beside her, shoulders hunched, his small hands clenched tightly against his chest, trying to preserve what little warmth he still had. His pale face reflected the cold, lips cracked and cheeks flushed with frostbite, yet beneath the weariness, Thyra glimpsed a flicker of something more. A faint resilience, buried deep beneath layers of fear and pain. They reached the cabin, its rough wooden walls silhouetted against the dark horizon. Thyra's fingers worked quickly, pulling the heavy door open with a low creak. Inside, the fire had long since died to smoldering embers, but the faint glow was enough to illuminate the worn furnishings and the thick blankets folded on the wooden bench. The familiar scent of dried herbs and pine smoke filled the cramped space, grounding Thyra as she stepped inside. "Come," she urged softly, guiding the boy to the bench. "Sit here. You need rest." He obeyed, dropping onto the cold wood with a tired sigh, his blue eyes wide she returned to the bench, her movements deliberate and calm. From a woven basket, she retrieved a small leather pouch filled with dried berries and a coarse loaf of rye bread. Breaking it into irregular pieces, she handed some to the boy. "Eat," she urged softly. "You need strength." He hesitated, eyes flickering with distrust, but hunger won over. His small hands took the food, and for the first time, a faint tremor of relief passed through his tense body as he bit into the bread. Thyra watched him, heart tightening at the fragility before her. "Do you have a name?" she asked gently. The boy's gaze dropped to the wolf carving, and then he spoke in a low, hesitant voice, words thick with a dialect slightly different from hers. "Eirik." The name landed in the room like a fragile offering. Thyra nodded, committing it to memory. "Eirik," she repeated softly, reaching out to touch his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement that here, in this small, cold cabin, he was no longer alone. Her thoughts flickered to Leif, to the boy who bore her son's name and blood. She wondered if Eirik's fate would intertwine with theirs, if this fragile flame of hope could kindle something stronger amid the frostbitten shadows. Eirik's eyes met hers again, and for a moment, the room held a fragile peace. No words were needed between them, only the quiet exchange of trust, born not from promises, but from shared pain and the desperate need to survive. Thyra moved towards the worn cot in the corner, pulling from beneath it a small bundle of furs. She laid them out carefully, patting the surface to smooth the matted layers. "Rest now," she said softly, helping Eirik rise and guiding him to the bed. "Tomorrow, we will speak more." As Eirik settled beneath the furs, Thyra knelt beside the bench and pulled a small knife from her belt. With practiced hands, she began cleaning the faint scars on Eirik's arms, dipping cloths into a bowl of warm water mixed with crushed herbs. The boy flinched at the cold touch, but did not pull away. His body, so often beaten and broken, allowed this small kindness cautiously. The rhythmic swish of water and the soft murmur of whispered prayers to the gods filled the room. Thyra's heart ached with each touch, each mark a testament to the suffering hidden beneath the Jarl's brutal facade. Yet beneath the scars, she found something unexpected, the faint pulse of life, of resistance. As the wounds were tended, Eirik's breath softened, and his tense grip on the wolf carving slackened. His eyelids, heavy with exhaustion, fluttered closed, though his brow remained furrowed. Thyra watched over him, vigilant and protective, her mind racing with plans yet unspoken. Outside, the wind howled through the night, rattling the shutters and carrying with it the distant cry of an owl. The cold was relentless, but inside the cabin, a fragile warmth grew, one born not of fire, but of new-found sanctuary. Thyra sat beside Eirik, her fingers brushing a stray lock of dark hair from his forehead. The boy's chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, dreams hovering at the edges of a restless sleep. She traced the faint lines of his face, so young, yet hardened by cruelty, and whispered a silent vow to the gods. No more pain, no more fear. Here, in this small space carved from the wilderness, she would shield him from the darkness that had claimed so many before. Hours passed, marked only by the shifting shadows cast by the flickering fire. Thyra's thoughts turned inward, memories of her own son mingling with the presence of this new child, both broken, both in need of a mother's fierce love. A soft sound stirred her from her vigil. Eirik opened his eyes, the blue depths clouded with uncertainty but glimmering with tentative trust. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Thyra smiled, a rare and fragile curve of her lips. "You are safe now." She reached into her cloak, pulling out the wooden wolf amulet, worn smooth like Eirik's carving. Holding it out, she said quietly, "The wolf protects us. Always." Eirik's fingers closed around the talisman, and in that moment, The cabin felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary, a fragile bastion against the cruelty beyond its walls. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to chase away the night's shadows. Inside, a mother and a child sat together in the quiet warmth, their bond forged not by blood alone, but by the shared promise of survival and hope. The cold wind sharpened the edges of the village as whispers began to ripple through the fjordside homes like the first cracks of ice forming over a frozen lake. The news of Leif's sudden return and the shadowy disappearance of boys from the Jarl's hold traveled faster than any rider could carry a message. What had been hushed conversations behind doors now spilled into the open, carried on the breath of neighbors, spilling from trembling lips around smoky hearths. The great hall no longer held the illusion of invincibility. Its walls, once a sanctuary for power and fear, began to seem fragile, vulnerable. Thyra knew that the safety of her small cabin, nestled against the jagged cliffs and gnarled pines, was as precarious as the shifting winter snows. The night she had taken her son back had been a gauntlet of terror and resolve, but the danger was far from over. Now, the eyes of the entire clan, and beyond, were upon her. Every glance from a passerby, every quiet murmur in the marketplace, carried the weight of scrutiny. The delicate balance between secrecy and exposure teetered dangerously. The old healer, Hilda, had warned her that the Jarl's allies would not simply accept the breaking of their lord's will. Power, Hilda said in her gravelly voice, is a beast that does not suffer wounds without striking back. Her eyes, sharp beneath the veil of age, flickered with a mix of sympathy and steel. You have lit a fire, Thyra. Now you must tend it carefully, lest it consume all. Thyra's nights were restless. She lay awake beneath heavy furs, listening to the wind howl outside, as if mourning the loss of the order that had once ruled with iron certainty. Her thoughts were a tempest of fear and fierce determination. What if the Jarl's men came for her? For Leif? For Eirik, too? The boy who had become a fragile shadow of hope in this frozen landscape? Yet there was no turning back. The faces of the broken boys haunted her waking hours. Their hollow eyes, the way their small bodies had been bent beneath the weight of cruelty. These were chains she could not ignore. She had severed one link by ending Ragnar, but the chain of silence stretched longer and tighter than she had imagined. The village, once a place of quiet endurance, began to split beneath the strain. Some whispered in support of Thyra's courage, recalling the Jarl's ruthless grip. Others, loyal to the old order, viewed her actions as a dangerous betrayal that threatened to unravel their fragile peace. The air grew thick with suspicion and fear. One afternoon, as the gray sky pressed down low and the snow softened to a steady fall, a group of men arrived at Thyra's doorstep. Their faces were hard, eyes narrowed like wolves scenting weakness. The leader, a burly man named Sigurd, was known for his allegiance to the late Jarl's bloodline. His gaze swept the small cabin with a mixture of contempt and calculation. "We've heard the tales," Sigurd said, voice low and rough as the winter wind. "The Jarl is dead, and the boys, some say they vanished with him. You hold secrets, woman. Secrets the clan demands." Thyra stood firm, her hands steady despite the sudden surge of cold dread. "Leif is my son," she said quietly, "and he is safe with me. No secrets here but the truth." Sigurd's eyes flickered with something darker. "Truth is a blade. It cuts both ways. The clan will want answers. You will answer." The men left with a warning hanging in the air, a threat as chilling as the frost. Thyra knew this was only the beginning. Soon, the rumors would draw attention beyond the village. Tribes from neighboring lands, rival clans hungry for power, even distant lords who saw opportunity in the chaos. In the days that followed, the subtle invasions began. Figures cloaked in furs appeared along the edges of the forest, watching from shadowed trees. Traders came with questions disguised in friendly barter. A scout from a rival clan, curious and calculating, lingered near the fjord, his eyes searching. As night fell, Thyra stood at the edge of the village, the cold wind tugging at her cloak. In the distance, faint lights flickered, watchful eyes, waiting, calculating. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril, but within her burned a fire that no winter darkness could quench. She would face whatever came. For Leif. For Eirik. For all those silenced by fear and cruelty. The gods may be silent, but she was not. The chill in the air thickened as winter tightened its grip on the fjordside village. Yet inside Thyra's cabin, the cold had become a distant shadow against the rising storm of dread. The flickering flames in the hearth cast long, restless shadows that danced on the rough-hewn walls, mirroring the turmoil within. Outside, the snow lay heavy and unbroken, a silent witness to the gathering tension that now encircled her fragile sanctuary. For weeks, whispers had spread like wildfire through the village and beyond, rumors of the Jarl's death, the stolen boys, and the widow who dared defy a man many once feared without question. Now, those whispers had sharpened into accusations, threats, and demands. The clan's fractured loyalty was raw and palpable. Some saw Thyra as a symbol of hope, others as a dangerous disruptor of the natural order. The old laws, once etched in stone and blood, felt brittle under the weight of change. The first knock came just before dawn, heavy and deliberate, shaking the thin wooden door. Thyra's heart froze momentarily, the pounding beneath her ribs echoing louder than the snowstorm outside. She had expected this moment, the reckoning. But no amount of preparation could steady the nerves that knotted her stomach. She opened the door to reveal a group of stern-faced men, their breath steaming in the cold morning air. Leading them was Sigurd, his broad frame imposing beneath a wolfskin cloak, eyes sharp and unforgiving. Behind him, a handful of warriors, their faces set like stone, held weapons loosely but unmistakably ready. Thyra, Gunnar's daughter. Sigurd's voice was low, carrying the weight of judgment. The clan demands answers. You harbor secrets that threaten the peace. It is time to speak, or face the consequences. Thyra stood tall, her green-gray eyes steady despite the tremor in her hands. The only secret I keep is the truth, she replied, voice calm but resolute. I will not betray those who cannot speak for themselves. The men exchanged glances, unease flickering behind their hardened expressions. Sigurd took a step forward, his gaze piercing. You have slain the Jarl. You have taken his son. The laws say the accused must stand before the council. Will you go willingly? Her jaw tightened. The thought of facing the council, a gathering steeped in tradition, where old grudges and power plays overshadowed justice, was daunting. Yet, to refuse was to invite violence, perhaps death. I will stand, she said simply, but I will speak only for the truth. A murmur rippled through the gathered men. The path forward was clear, yet fraught with peril. Word traveled swiftly, and by midday, the clan's hall was crowded with warriors, women, and elders. The air was thick with smoke and tension, the scent of roasted meat mingling uneasily with the biting cold seeping through the timbered walls. Torches flickered along the great hall's carved pillars, casting sharp contrasts of light and shadow over the faces gathered. Thyra stepped inside, her cloak heavy but her posture unyielding. Leif walked beside her, his small hand tightly clasped in hers, his blue eyes wide but determined. Behind them, Eirik's presence was a silent testament to the lives she sought to protect. At the head of the hall sat the council, elder warriors and chieftains draped in furs, their faces lined by years of battle and governance. Thorvald, the aged counselor whose quiet wisdom had once comforted her, now regarded her with a mixture of sorrow and cautious respect. His pale eyes, clouded but piercing, rested heavily upon her. Sigurd stepped forward, voice booming across the hall. Thyra, Gunnar's daughter, stands accused of killing the Jarl, of harboring boys stolen from the clan, and defying the sacred laws. She will answer for her deeds. A heavy silence fell. The weight of the accusation hung like a blade above Thyra's head. Yet in the stillness, she sensed something else: curiosity, fear, and a faint hope flickering among the faces. Thorvald cleared his throat, his voice steady despite his age. This is no ordinary trial. The Jarl's death has torn the clan's heart. We must seek the truth, for the sake of the future. Thyra took a breath, the fire of conviction burning beneath her calm exterior. I have sworn never to reveal what I saw that night, she began, voice low but clear, because some wounds are not meant for open eyes. But I carry a mother's heart, and I will not let my son, or any child, be broken by darkness. A ripple passed through the hall. The council exchanged uneasy glances. Some murmured in agreement, others whispered warnings. She continued, the Jarl was no protector. He was a tyrant who wielded fear like a weapon. The boys taken were not raised as warriors, they were shattered. I cannot say more. But I ask you, look to your sons, your brothers. See the shadows in their eyes. If we do not break this cycle, who will? Her words struck a chord. The hall held its breath, caught between old loyalties and the painful truths they all sensed. A voice rang out, sharp and accusing. You speak of darkness, yet you have brought death upon our leader. Who will lead us now? Sigurd stepped forward, his gaze hard. The clan must decide if Thyra's rebellion is justice or betrayal. Thyra met his gaze unflinchingly. Justice is the shield of the weak and the sword of the righteous. If the Jarl's reign bred fear and silence, then my act was a call to break those bonds. The council deliberated, voices rising and falling like the tide. Stories surfaced. Other mothers and fathers who had seen their children return changed, haunted. Whispers of abuse and cruelty no longer hidden by the Jarl's shadow. Thorvald finally raised his hand, calling for silence. The clan stands at a crossroads. We may cling to the past, or we may forge a new path, one where honor does not mask darkness. The tension was suffocating, but a shift was palpable. The old order was cracking, and in its place stirred something uncertain but vital. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the hall's entrance. Figures clad in the bare pelts of loyal warriors pushed through the crowd, their faces grim. Among them was Brynjolf, a fierce champion of the Jarl, his eyes blazing with fury. How dare you defy the Jarl's memory, he roared. Thyra's blade has brought chaos. The clan must be united under strength, not broken by fear. The hall fractured. Shouts and threats filled the air, men drawing weapons, some seeking to silence Thyra by force. The fragile peace shattered in an instant. Leif clung to his mother, eyes wide with terror and determination. Thyra's heart hammered, but she refused to bow to fear. Thorvald's voice rose above the chaos, gravelly and commanding. Enough. This is not the way of our ancestors. We are bound by law and honor, not by bloodlust. Slowly, the room quieted. The warriors lowered their weapons, the tension ebbing like a tide retreating from the shore. Thorvald turned to Thyra. You have shown bravery few possess. But the path ahead demands more than courage. It requires unity. Thyra nodded, exhaustion and resolve mingling in her gaze. I seek only to protect my son, and to save the others from a fate worse than death. The council conferred in hushed tones, the weight of their decision pressing heavily on the room. At last, Thorvald spoke again. The clan will grant Thyra and her son sanctuary. We will dismantle the old ways that bred such cruelty. But this will not be easy. Trust must be rebuilt, and wounds healed. A murmur of agreement swept through the hall. Eyes that had once glared with suspicion now held cautious hope. Outside, the winter wind moaned, carrying the scent of distant fires and the promise of change. The old order was dying, but from its ashes a new beginning stirred. As the gathering dispersed, Sigurd approached Thyra, his voice low. This is only the beginning. There will be those who resist. Thyra met him steadily. Let them come. I will stand for my son, and for all who can. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, its glow casting flickering shadows that danced gently across the cabin walls. Outside, the relentless bite of winter pressed against the wooden beams, but inside, a fragile warmth had begun to thaw the frost that had long settled in Thyra's heart. The long months of fear, of silent suffering, and of desperate resistance were giving way, not to full relief, but to a cautious hope, tentative and delicate as the first bloom after a harsh winter. Leif sat close to his mother, his small frame no longer rigid with the tension that once gripped him like iron chains. His blue eyes held a softness that had been absent for so long, a glimpse of the boy he had been before the Jarl's shadow darkened his childhood. The wolf amulet hung once again around his neck, its worn wood a symbol of protection and connection, a tangible reminder of his father's love and now his mother's fierce determination. Eirik, the boy who had come to them like a lost shadow, was perched on a rough-hewn stool nearby. His gaze was less guarded, and a timid smile had begun to break through the layers of fear etched in his young face. Though the scars of his past remained, both seen and unseen, a sense of belonging had begun to take root, nurtured not by empty promises, but by the steady presence of a woman who refused to abandon those broken by cruelty. Thyra's hands moved quietly, weaving strands of wool into a simple garment, the repetitive motion grounding her in the present. Her green-gray eyes reflected the flickering flames, but beneath the surface, emotions churned like a winter storm. The weight of what had been endured, of the silence she had guarded, the horrors she had witnessed, pressed heavily, but with it came a deep resolve. The path that had led her here had been carved with blood and sacrifice. The night she had taken the Jarl's life was a turning point, one shrouded in secrecy and fear. By refusing to speak of the unspeakable, she had protected not only her son but countless others, ensuring that the poisonous roots of darkness could be uprooted without tearing the fragile fabric of the clan apart. Now, as the days of reckoning unfolded, the truth that had once been buried beneath layers of power and fear began to emerge, whispered first in shadowed corners, and then voiced openly in the great hall. Mothers who had suffered in silence found strength in Thyra's example. Fathers who had turned away faced the reality of their children's scars. The clan, fractured and trembling, was slowly beginning to heal, not through vengeance, but through acknowledgement and a tentative willingness to change. Outside, the murmurs of the village carried the scent of shifting tides. The old order, once so absolute, was no longer unchallenged. The council had granted sanctuary, but with that came responsibility, an unspoken promise that the wounds inflicted would not be forgotten, but addressed, and that the future could be shaped by compassion as well as strength. Thyra's gaze lifted to the small window, where the pale winter sky stretched endlessly. The cold winds that swept across the fjord now seemed less like a cruel reminder of loss, and more like a cleansing breath, carrying away the remnants of shadows past. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her son could grow not as a pawn of cruelty, but as a boy free to learn kindness and courage in equal measure. Leif's hand found hers, small fingers curling around hers with quiet trust. "Mother," he whispered, voice still soft but steadier than before, "will the fear ever leave?" Thyra's lips curved into a gentle smile, the edges worn but genuine. "It may linger for a time, my son, like the cold after the storm, but it will fade, and when it does, you will stand stronger, not because the darkness never touched you, but because you chose to rise beyond it." The boy nodded slowly, the flicker of hope warming his gaze. It was a fragile thing, but real. Eirik shifted, his eyes meeting hers with a faint spark of courage. "Will I ever be strong enough to face what I have seen?" Her voice was steady, carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Strength is not measured by battles fought or wounds inflicted. It is found in the will to heal, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. You are stronger already because you survived, and because you found a place where you are safe. The walls of the cabin seemed to close in gently, a sanctuary not just of wood and stone, but of shared pain and quiet triumph. Thyra's heart, long battered, found a rhythm renewed by the presence of these two children who were both her burden and her blessing. The days that followed brought small miracles, soft laughter from the boys as they played beneath the watchful eyes of the village's wary but changing gaze, the slow thawing of suspicion among neighbors who began to see Thyra not as a rebel, but as a guardian. Even the old healer Hilda returned more often, her hands steady as she tended to wounds both physical and spiritual. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and bathed the fjord in a muted amber glow, Thorvald came again. His steps were slower now, but his eyes held a quiet approval that spoke volumes. Sitting beside the fire, he regarded Thyra with the weight of years and the burden of clan wisdom. "You have done what few could," he said softly, voice gruff but warm. "You faced the darkness, and you did not falter. The clan begins to see that strength can be found in mercy." Thyra met his gaze, the firelight reflecting the determination that had carried her through the darkest nights. "The gods gave me no easy path," she replied, "but I knew that silence would only breed more suffering. The truth may wound, but it also frees." Thorvald nodded slowly, a shadow of a smile touching his lips. "There is healing ahead, but it will be slow. The scars on bodies and souls will not vanish, but they can be softened by care and honor." As the evening deepened, the three sat together, a woman whose spirit had been forged in fire, and two boys whose futures were no longer dictated by fear. Outside, the night stretched its velvet cloak over the village, but within the cabin, a light glowed steady and sure. Thyra's thoughts drifted to her husband Hakon, to the love that had once filled these walls, and to the promise she had made, not just to her son, but to every child who had suffered under the Jarl's cruel hand. The path of redemption was not one walked alone, but with those who dared to believe in change. In the days that followed, the village began to shift, subtle at first. Men who had once turned away now met Thyra's gaze without hostility. Parents spoke quietly to each other, their voices tinged with the courage to confront painful truths. The great hall, once a place of fear and silence, slowly opened its doors to new voices, voices that demanded justice, but also compassion. Leif and Eirik grew stronger, their laughter a balm to the wounded land. And though the winter winds remained harsh outside, the warmth of a new beginning blossomed inside the hearts of those who dared to hope. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges yet to come. But in the quiet moments by the fire, as Thyra braided her son's hair and Eirik watched with shy curiosity, the promise of peace, however fragile, was no longer a distant dream. It was real, and it was theirs. The wind whispered softly through the pine boughs, carrying with it the faint scent of thawing earth and distant smoke. The village, once shadowed by fear and silence, now stirred with a quiet vitality born of change. The bitter winters remained harsh beyond the wooden walls and fur-lined cloaks, but inside the small cabins and longhouses, the cold had loosened its grip, replaced by warmth kindled through courage and resilience. Thyra stood at the edge of the village, her breath misting in the crisp morning air as she gazed across the fjord. The waters shimmered under a pale spring sun, the ice breaking into fragments that floated slowly toward the sea. It was a world transformed, like her own journey, emerging from the frozen depths of grief and despair into the fragile light of hope. Her hands, calloused and steady, rested lightly on the wooden fence that bordered the path. The wolf amulet hung once more around her neck, its worn surface a silent testament to the years of struggle and sacrifice. The faces of those she had saved, the boys who had become more than shadows in the night, were etched into her memory like carvings upon ancient stone. Leif moved. At the heart of the village, the great hall stood less as a monument to power and fear, and more as a gathering place for voices once silenced. The traditions that had bound them were changing, shaped now by the needs of the many rather than the will of a single man. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, sending the sky aflame with amber and rose, Thorvald approached Thyra's cabin. His steps were slow, his ancient frame bent but filled with a quiet strength that had weathered countless seasons. In his hands he carried a small carved box, its surface etched with runes that glowed faintly in the fading light. "Child of the Wolf," he said, his voice gravelly but warm, "the clan honors your courage. The elders have decreed that the old ways must bend to the new, that the shadows which once fell upon us shall no longer find shelter beneath our roofs." He offered Thyra the box, and as she took it in her hands, she felt the weight of the moment, not just the gift itself, but the symbol it carried. A new beginning, forged from the ashes of the past. Inside the box lay a simple pendant, a wolf's head carved from bone, its eyes inlaid with polished amber. It was a token of acceptance, an invitation for Thyra to stand not as a widow shunned or a rebel feared, but as a guardian honored within the clan's renewed heart. Tears blurred her vision as she met Thorvald's eyes. The old man nodded, a silent blessing passed from one generation to the next. "You have shown that true strength lies not in the sword alone, but in the will to protect and to heal." That night, the village gathered beneath a sky thick with stars, the air filled with the soft crackle of fires and the murmur of prayers to the gods. Around the central fire pit, faces both young and old shared stories, not of conquest or bloodshed, but of survival, forgiveness, and hope. The children played freely, their laughter a fragile but powerful song that echoed through the valleys. Leif stood close to his mother, his fingers entwined with hers. His gaze lifted to the stars, a question lingering in his eyes. "Mother," he whispered, "will the gods see our pain? Will they guide us through what has come?" Thyra's smile was gentle, her voice steady despite the ache that lingered in her chest. "The gods see all, Leif. They watch the brave and the broken alike. And though their silence may feel distant, they answer through the courage we carry in our hearts. We are the ones who must be their voice and their strength." Beside them, Eirik clutched the wooden wolf amulet, its familiar weight grounding him in this new world. The boy's eyes met Thyra's, a quiet promise passing between them, that they would face whatever storms came together, bound not just by fate, but by the fierce love of a mother who refused to surrender. As the firelight flickered and the night deepened, a figure emerged from the shadows, Sigurd. His face was worn, softened by time and reflection. He approached slowly, nodding his head in acknowledgement. "You have changed the course of our clan," he said quietly. "Not all will welcome it, but the future demands it. We owe you a debt, for you have torn away the veil that blinded us." Thyra's eyes held no triumph, only the solemn acceptance of the burden she bore. "I did what I had to, for my son, and for all our sons." The old ways could no longer shelter darkness. The village, once fractured by fear and silence, breathed together as one under the ancient sky. The flickering fires mirrored the fragile but unyielding flame of hope kindled in their hearts. In the weeks that followed, new rituals took root, celebrations not of war, but of renewal. The elders spoke openly of the need to protect the young, to nurture strength through kindness as well as skill. Mothers and fathers walked more freely, no longer shadowed by fear of the Jarl's wrath. The boys who had suffered bore their scars with quiet dignity, their stories woven into the fabric of the clan's evolving identity. One morning, as the first shoots of green pierced the melting snow, Thyra stood outside her cabin watching Eirik prepare for a journey. The boy had grown stronger, his eyes steady with determination. He carried a small pack, tied with leather straps, and the wooden wolf amulet hung visibly around his neck. "I must go," Eirik said softly, the weight of his decision evident in his voice. "There is a world beyond these mountains, places where I might learn to be the man I want to be." Thyra nodded, her heart heavy yet proud. "The gods watch over your path. Remember where you come from, and carry that strength with you." He stepped forward, clasping her hand in farewell. "Thank you for saving me, not just from the Jarl's shadow, but from myself." As Eirik disappeared down the winding path, Thyra turned back toward the village, feeling the dawn of a new era settling over the land. The long winter of their souls was ending, replaced by the slow but certain growth of spring. Leif reached for her hand, his fingers warm and sure. "Mother, will there always be darkness?" She squeezed his hand gently, her gaze steady as she looked toward the horizon. "There will always be darkness, my son, but there will also always be light. And in that light, we find our strength to stand." Together, they walked back into the village, into a world forever changed by the fierce love of a mother who dared to break the silence, to shatter the chains, and to forge a future where children could grow free. The old wolves howled in the distance, their voices ringing clear across the fjord, a song of endurance, of hope, and of the unyielding spirit that binds past and future. And beneath the vast, cold sky, a new chapter began, written not in blood or fear, but in the quiet courage of those who choose to love against all odds. The fire's glow dimmed to embers as night deepened, casting a hushed calm over the cabin where Thyra sat with her sons. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying stories of endurance and change across the fjord. In this quiet moment, the weight of years pressed gently upon her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a solemn testament to the journey they had endured. Her gaze drifted to Leif, his fingers curling around the worn wooden wolf amulet that hung against his chest. The boy who had once been stolen, silenced by fear and pain, now breathed with a tentative hope. The sharp edges of his childhood were beginning to soften, replaced by a resilience forged in love and fierce protection. Eirik, seated nearby, watched with eyes that no longer held the shadows of despair, but gleamed with the cautious light of someone learning to trust again. For Thyra, the path had been long and fraught with danger, a narrow ridge between vengeance and mercy, between silence and truth. She had chosen to walk it alone, carrying secrets too heavy for open voices. Yet, in her silence, she had spoken louder than any words could. Her act of defiance had shattered the chains that bound not only her son, but countless others. The clan's old order, steeped in fear and cruelty, was unraveling thread by fragile thread. Still, she knew the road ahead would be difficult. The scars, both seen and hidden, would not vanish overnight. Healing was a slow, jagged process, marked by setbacks as much as progress. The villagers were learning to face uncomfortable truths, and the echoes of the past lingered like the chill that clung to the fjord's waters. And yet, for the first time in many winters, a fragile warmth had begun to grow. The halls that once echoed with silence and submission now murmured with cautious voices seeking justice and compassion. Old laws were bending, not breaking, to accommodate the fierce love of a mother and the quiet strength of a community determined to rise beyond darkness. Thyra's thoughts wandered to her husband, Hakon, whose memory was woven into every knot of the wolf amulet. She imagined him watching from the shadows of the gods, his spirit steady and proud. "Your father was a man of kindness," she whispered to Leif, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to spill. "You carry that kindness now. That is your true strength." Leif's eyes met hers, a flicker of understanding sparking between them. "Will the fear ever truly leave?" he asked softly, the innocence of a child still lingering beneath the layers of hardship. She smiled, gentle and knowing. Fear may never fully vanish. It is like the frost on the earth. Sometimes it returns. Thyra's heart was heavy with the knowledge that many battles remained. The old guards of the clan would not relinquish their power easily. Whispers of resistance stirred among those who feared change. The scars on the boys would remind them daily of the past's cruelty. Yet, in this fragile peace, there was also promise, an opportunity to rewrite the stories that had long defined them. The wolf's howl echoed faintly in the distance, a wild, mournful song carried on the cold wind. It was a call not of despair, but of endurance, a reminder that even in the deepest winter, life fights to return. Thyra closed her eyes, breathing in the night's cold air mingled with the warmth of the fire. The gods may be silent, but their silence was not absence. It was a space for mortal courage to grow. She thought of all the mothers who had lost sons, the fathers who had turned away, the boys who had suffered in silence. Each one was a thread in the tapestry of the clan's future, a future shaped by those who dared to love fiercely enough to challenge the darkness. The dawn would come, as it always did, slow and certain, and with it, a new day where children could grow not as pawns of power, but as free souls. Leif shifted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mother, will we ever be truly free?" Her hand found his, squeezing gently. Freedom is not a place, but a choice. Every step you take away from fear, every act of kindness, every moment you choose courage, that is freedom. It lives within you. The fire dwindled to a glow, the room growing colder as sleep tugged at their weary limbs. Yet, in the quiet glow of that small cabin, something immeasurable stirred, a quiet revolution born of love and sacrifice. Outside, the frozen fjord caught the pale light of the stars, reflecting a world still harsh but growing softer on the edges. Thyra's last thoughts before sleep claimed her were a prayer, not for vengeance, nor for glory, but for peace, for healing, for the strength to raise a new generation free from the shadows that had once ruled them. And as the wolves howled beneath the vast, cold sky, their voices carried a promise that even the darkest nights give way to dawn, and that the fiercest power in any age is the love that refuses to be broken. If this story touched your heart, consider joining us on this journey through the past, where the echoes of Viking courage remind us that even in the harshest times, humanity's deepest strength lies in love and resilience. Subscribe, share your thoughts below, and prepare to walk with us into the next chapter of tales forged by fire, ice, and the unbreakable bonds of family. In those ancient lands, beneath the endless sky of snow and stars, they learned that compassion can be the sharpest sword, and that sometimes the greatest victories are won not in battle, but in the quiet courage to protect those we hold most dear.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.